We are here to bring a new type of news show.
New insights, new styles, and new topics every day.
We are News Generation.
Bringing news just for you. It's Monday, June 3rd here in Seoul. I'm Song Yujin, and you're watching News Generation. We have a new panelist joining us today. She is Lee Jung-hwa. Welcome, Jung-hwa, to the show.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lee Jung-hwa, who is currently doing African Regional Studies at a graduate school here in Korea. Personally, I'm really into the rich literatures written by African and African diasporan authors.
Great to have you. And we have, as always, Walter Lee joining us today.
Lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you. Now, both are here to speak on behalf of people in their 20s and 30s. Now, let's start with the news feed, which covers different hashtags and news items that have been trending online over the past 24 hours. We begin with China's Chang'e 6 unmanned spacecraft, which has successfully landed on the far side of the moon, the side that does not face the Earth. According to the China National Space Administration, the craft touched down in a massive crater called the South Pole Aitken Basin on Sunday morning, a month after launching from the Wenchang Space Launch Center in Hainan. This is China's second successful landing on the far side of the moon, a region no other country has reached. The Chang'e 6 will spend up to 3 days collecting rock and soil samples from the surface for the first time in history. Now, moving on, back here in the country, what's your definition of a high salary? A survey by a domestic job search platform shows that office workers in Korea believe it should be 85.5 million Korean won, which is around $61,800 or more. When asked how they could achieve a high salary, more than half of the respondents said they should change jobs and negotiate for higher pay, followed by getting a promotion, staying at a company for a long time, and obtaining a professional license. Now, finally, the Science Ministry's Persons of Distinguished Service to Science and Technology program is shedding light on the dedication of veteran scientists in Korea. After adding 4 names last year, the ministry held a designation ceremony last Thursday. The newly honored scientists are the late Kim Sung-wan, a renowned biomedical scientist, Kim Jae-kwan, former president of the Korea Research Institute of Standards and Science, and designer of the Pohang Iron and Steel Company, Song Hee-sung, a professor of physics at Seoul National University who laid the foundation for Korea's physics education, and Han Sang-ki, former director of the International Institute of Tropical Agricultural Research in Nigeria. Since 2017, the government has awarded this title to 85 scientists who have significantly contributed to Korea's scientific and technological development. So here in the studio, I want to ask you, among these 4 distinguished scientists, which is so hard to pick one, is there any scientist that stood out to you or who you'd like to talk about more?
Well, after doing some research on them all, because I was unaware of who they were. I couldn't just choose one because they all had really big influence on the country, South Korea. And the country that we're living in today is due to these sort of scientists.
Right.
So I will say that it's long overdue and recognize these men for their contribution and society, and I'm happy to see them get the respect that they deserve.
Right, they definitely need respect. These people help, as you mentioned, develop Korea's scientific and also technological fields. Now, what about you, Jung-hwa? Is there anyone who stood out to you more?
Okay, of course, the Professor Han Sang-ki does to me. Agriculture is the very important and fundamental industry in Africa, and I know about 60% of the world's arable land is in Africa. However, it's unfortunate that many farms in Africa prioritize growing commodity crops like coffee, cocoa, and tobacco for international markets rather than focusing on crops that can benefit the local communities.
Right.
So Professor Han's work in breeding essential food crops, especially for Africans like cassava, yams, and maize, is very commendable, I think.
Right, definitely need more respect and need more recognition here in the not only here in the country but around the world. And that was our news feed for this Monday. So now we're going to move on to our main discussion of the day. We've actually prepared a 3-part series on Africa for NewsGen this week. Africa is the second largest continent in the world after Asia, covering nearly 1/5 of the Earth's total land surface. And it consists of more than 50 countries. It has a population of almost 1.5 billion people, or nearly 20% of the global population. So there's so much more to discover about this continent, and that's what we're going to do over the next 3 episodes on NewsGen. And I want to point out that this series was inspired by the two-day Korea-Africa Summit, which starts tomorrow here in Korea. So, Walter, first of all, for those who are not familiar with the 2024 Korea-Africa Summit, please tell us more. Why is it important, its significance, etc.?
Yeah, so this summit organized by the Yoon Suk-yeol administration is set to be the largest international event hosted by the government and marks the first multilateral summit between Korea and the continent of Africa, with the government's strong commitment to significantly enhancing diplomacy with Africa and actively promoting exchange and cooperation. This summit is expected to serve as a milestone in establishing a future-orientated partnership between country and also continent.
Right, so delegations from 48 African nations are set to take part in this two-day summit. And so to help us delve deeper into Africa here on NewsGen, we have Chonghwa here in the studio. Chonghwa, you've written several books about Africa, and you're also studying in African studies, as you briefly mentioned. So could you please tell a bit more about yourself, first of all?
Okay. My journey with Africa began with an experience of internship at the KOICA, Korea International Cooperation Agency's Ghana office back in 2015. After a year, I traveled some West African countries by road. And following that initial encounter, I came back to Korea and worked for a travel agency taking in charge of African programs. Through these experiences, I've had the privilege of visiting more than 20 African countries.
Wow.
It's offering unique insights and perspectives. Since then, I've actively engaged in reading, researching, and participating in various activities related to Africa. Drawing from these experiences and my studies, I've authored several books and publications, such as 있는 그대로 가나, Ghana as it is, and 생각보다 가까운 아프리카, Africa closer than you think.
I mean, it's really admirable that you've participated in so many activities. You've written books, you've traveled to more than 20 African countries. So I think you're already, or you're on your way of becoming an expert in Africa. So my second question to you is, what kind of sparked your interest towards this continent?
So living, traveling, working, researching in and on Africa have been very eye-opening to me. Before I discovered Africa, my world was pretty much limited to what we call the global north, even though I studied international studies in college. But then I realized there's the whole other part of the world I hadn't known much about. So for me, learning about Africa has been like an adventure, exploration, and revolution. In short, Africa has really broadened my perspective and helped me to see the world in a more multi-dimensional way.
It definitely seems like an eye-opening experience. So today we, with the help of Chonghwa and also our very own Walter, we're gonna make our discussion, we're gonna have a discussion delving deeper into Africa. And to make our episode more engaging, we've actually prepared a mini quiz to challenge some common stereotypes or misconceptions about Africa. But before we start, I want to ask you this question, Walter. What comes to your mind when you think of the African continent?
I guess a lot of people would probably think, when they think of Africa, obviously safari, the wildlife, etc. But I don't actually have many stereotypes about Africa, because I grew up in Australia, and we have a close connection with South Africa due to South Africa once upon a time being under the British Empire, and so we do have that connection together. And so we've shared a lot of cultures, sports, etc. across the two countries, like cricket and rugby.
Right.
So it is a continent that if given the chance, I'd love to visit South Africa. I'd love to visit many countries within Africa, such as Mauritius or Ghana, etc. But yes, for me, I don't have very many stereotypes, but I can't wait for this quiz coming up.
Well, I can't wait for the quiz coming up as well. So for Walter, South Africa, cricket, and other sports come to your mind when you think of Africa. I think you mentioned a very good point, because some people still have the stereotype of Africa these days. When they think of Africa, they think of the wildlife. Some people, I think I've heard them talking about poverty as well, corruption were some of the most mentioned stereotypes that these these people have. So for you, Chongwa, our African expert, I would like to ask you, what are some common misconceptions and stereotypes that you've encountered that people here in Korea or in other parts of the world have about the continent?
What's really obvious is that a lot of people think of Africa as just hot, unstable, poor, flat, and all the same. But what I want to say is Africa is a huge continent, and it cannot be understood in such black and white terms, like good or bad, rich or poor, developed or underdeveloped. There's so much more to it.
Right, and we're gonna delve more into it through our mini quiz, which is coming up soon. But before our quiz, we're gonna hear from some of our viewers too about their perceptions of Africa. And here's what 3 of them had to say. So if we look at the comments, Doina says, Africa is, from my point of view, one of the treasures of the earth. Amazing images and wild animals, ancient ruins, minerals and sand, lots of people who need help and assistance, new countries which fight for their own self, music and dances, local wars, famine. Benny says, for me, when I think of Africa, one of the interesting continents in the world and even their developing countries, that has been a good opportunity to open a good diplomatic relationship with the rest of the world and even build a friendship perhaps with other foreigners too. Leon says, I think of the wildlife with animals like lions, elephants, leopards, rhinos, and buffaloes, and some of the geographical features like the Sahara Desert and River Nile. So looking at the comments from our viewers, they talked about wildlife, ancient ruins, minerals, also poverty, assistance of wars and famine. So we're going to help debunk these stereotypes if they are. So we actually selected 3 statements that we think will help you guys and us too here in the studio understand Africa better. So are you ready for our mini pop quiz?
Yes, I am indeed.
Right, so we have these small OX signs that will help us give our answer. So number 1, the first question to you, Walter.
Yes.
Tesla CEO Elon Musk is from Africa.
See, as the tech nerd,
You're the tech guy.
Yes, I know this answer, and he is, I believe, from South Africa.
Well, I have great belief in Walter that he is 99% correct. But for that 1%, Chongwa, what's the answer?
The answer is yes. From South Africa. South Africa is made up of a diverse mix of people, including black, white, Indian, Malaysian, Chinese, and more.
Right. So
Korean.
Right. So South Africa is definitely it is a country rich with ethnic diversity. So congratulations on earning 1 point, Walter.
Thank you very
And
much.
now moving on to our second question. Number 2. Africa, this is kind of like an obvious question, but we're going to just go with it. Number 2, Africa is a multi-ethnic continent.
Yeah, I would definitely say with the amount of countries that you have within Africa, it has to be multi-ethnic, in my opinion.
Right, the continent has more than 50 countries. So, Chongwa, what's the answer?
Yes.
Woohoo!
Africa is said to have around more than 3,000 ethnic groups.
3,000? Wow.
But with rapid population growth and increasing diversity, it's getting harder to classify them as they mix together more and more.
I see. So Africa is indeed a multi-ethnic continent. Walter, you've got every answer right until now.
Until now.
But we have the final question. Our viewers, I hope you are taking part in our quiz as well. Last but not least, Africa is the most resource-rich continent. O or X?
The most. Oh, I don't know about that. Like, I'm not too sure. I'm gonna say no, it might not be. But like, I know there are a lot of resources, but I don't know if it's the most resources.
Right.
Yes.
So to our African expert, Chonghwa, what's the answer?
Let's say yes.
Oh.
Africa has tons of different kinds of resources underground. For example, there's coltan, which is essential for electronic devices like cell phone. And nickel, which is used in making electric vehicles. Plus, there's gold and diamonds for jewelry. These resources are very valuable for local people and future generations as well. So we need to use them more cautiously and do our best to preserve them.
Right. So, based on our third question, Africa is indeed the most resource-rich continent. And so, this is the end of our mini pop quiz. Walter, I think you did a great job. You got 2 questions right.
2 out of 3 is not bad.
Yeah, it's actually excellent. Now, back to our discussion. These statements that we've just shown you through the quiz seem to kind of address the most common misconceptions that we have about Africa. For example, some people still think that the people in the African continent are mostly dark skinned, and also some people think that the continent itself is struggling from extreme poverty. So, but it seems that this is not correct. They are misconceptions. They are indeed stereotypes. So, Chonghwa, I want to ask you, what do you think have contributed in building up these stereotypes or misconceptions?
First of all, I think Africa is physically less accessible to Koreans. But more importantly, it's about how we understand the world. We've been taught to think in binary terms, like good versus bad, developed versus underdeveloped, like that. This is what Europe has said so far. Since around the 17th to 18th century, Europe saw itself as the most advanced society. So in the context of that, they created binary oppositions to prove it, which fueled colonization and imperialism in Africa, leaving a lasting impact. But the world is much more complex than that, and we need to understand it in a more nuanced way.
Right, and it's such a great opportunity for us to have this discussion and kind of enlighten our viewers and kind of like debunk these misconceptions and common stereotypes that we have towards Africa. Now, back to Africa, Chonghwa, I heard that you've lived in Ghana for about a year. So because our program is about millennials and Gen Z, as everybody knows, I want to ask you, this is kind of like a funny question, but during your stay in Africa, did you notice any differences between millennials and Gen Z here in Korea and those in Africa or Ghana?
What I clearly noticed was that they absolutely like dance and music. I think people there are less sensitive to noise from others than us Koreans. Everywhere young people gather, there's always loud music. Yeah, So I have an interesting story from when I traveled to the rural areas in Ghana. One night there was a dance party in an open space in the village, which is very common. And the young guy saw us and asked, "Hey, come and join a dance together."
Oh, invitation.
Yeah. And you know, many of us Koreans feel a bit shy about dancing in public. So I said, "No, I cannot dance," which implies, you know, I cannot dance well. After that, I never forget his facial expression with the surprising when he said, "How on earth human being cannot dance?" I think this episode really shows how important dance and music are in the lives of Ghanaians people. It's literally their way of life and how they express themselves.
Right. And adding on to that, I heard that Africa has a really vibrant and diverse culture. So I would like to experience dancing and African music when I visit Africa.
Well, you know that you like dancing so much, though.
Right. Hope I can have a chance to experience that in the future. Now, before we wrap up our discussion today, Chonghwa, back to you. We've dealt a lot about like misconceptions, stereotypes, and how Africa has been like a relatively less known continent to Korea when compared to other parts of the world. So I want to ask you, do you like to see, what kind of changes would you like to see among millennials and Gen Zs here in Korea regarding their perception or how they perceive Africa?
I hope we realize that the world is more connected than we think.
Right.
Many things we enjoy come from outside of our country or with the help of the others. So we should fully respect and value them. And the same goes for how we think about Africa.
Right, definitely we need more respect and recognition towards every culture, not only Africa, but to cultures around the world. And last but not least, as we briefly mentioned during the start of our discussion, tomorrow, June 4th, is the start of the very first Korea-Africa Summit. So as part of the younger generation who is going to spearhead the future, anything that you'd like to see come out of this summit? Are you excited about it?
Obviously, this is a very exciting event, it being one of the biggest events for the government at the moment. And this is a very important time to strengthen ties between both South Korea as well as the countries in Africa, because we obviously, there's still a lot of misconceptions about Africa, but it's also a great time for Africa to learn a little bit, like the countries of Africa to learn a bit about South Korea as well. So it's a mutual sort of relationship that we're trying to make here, and I can't wait to see what this summit ends up, doing for both sides of the countries and continent.
Right, I definitely think that will be a great chance for the people in Africa to know more about Korea, and vice versa, people in Korea to learn more about Africa as a continent. Now, what are your expectations from our African expert?
I noticed that the summit focuses a lot on economics and politics. But for more constructive and long-term cooperation, we need to understand each other in a more humanistic and fundamental way.
Right.
As a student in this field and someone who believes it's really, really important, I hope the summit encourages our society to promote the interests on the humanities about Africa as well.
And I think that it's not just like big events like the summit, but it's people like you who are breaking these stereotypes and making Africa more familiar to the Korean people, right?
Yeah.
Right, and that's all the time we have for today, but NewsGen is here every day from 9:30 to 10 a.m. Korea time, bringing you more topics young people are talking about. Special thanks today to Lee Jung-hwa.
Thank you.
And as always, Walter Lee.
Lovely to be here.
And thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. We are News Generation.